Hey, Kelsie.
Hey, Brooke.
Want to tell everyone what's happening in today's episode?
Today, we're going to talk about textbooks and how they cover women's history, or don't. And we're going to talk about women who served as spies in the Civil War.
Great. Let's get into this.
Hello, and welcome to Remedial Herstory, the other 50%, the podcast that explores what happened to the women in history class. Now, here's your host, Kelsie Brooke Eckert, and her partner in crime, Brooke Neva Sullivan.
Episode 9, Crossdressing and Spies. Brooke, we're in person!
We are in the same room.
I'm so excited.
I know, seriously. That was like crazy to try and get this done over Zoom, but we did it. And we handled well.
Yes.
Oh man,
Are you so grateful to be home?
Like my own bed is just like glorious.
I don't know if I told people over social media, but I don't know if I told people on the podcast.
Yeah, so I stayed with my parents for a little less than 30 days, almost a month, because our daycare wasn't open, and I've got 2 little guys, so they graciously took us in and hung with my boys so I could work during the day. And so I work remotely for my company, so I can work from anywhere, which was really helpful.
Yeah.
So I got to work from beautiful Connecticut, which was lovely, but I was definitely missing New Hampshire, and I don't know, being up here in September is like the best time of year, so I was like, all right, I gotta get back.
Yeah. Well, and like, it's so, I mean, I'm sure every parent out there right now is feeling the pain that you were in.
Yeah.
And like,
thankfully I have a great family that like was willing to jump in. But that's not the case for everybody. And it's just been, everyone's kind of dealing, and thank goodness the daycare is back open and my children are so excited to be back with their friends, and the teachers did everything they possibly could to make sure that the school is safe and it's open, and like many teachers right now that are trying to get kids back to school. I mean, you're back, right?
Yep. Back with kids.
Oh my goodness. So how is it going so far?
It's going good. I mean, I haven't actually like taught a class yet because we've been doing orientations, but it's good. And the protocols seem appropriate and reasonable. So I'm excited that I feel safe, which is good.
That's the most important part. I know.
We have 0 cases in the town that I work in and in the town that we live in. And so it seems, I'm sure there are some people who are like, what? She's in person? But like, we have no cases here. So it does seem really safe.
Yeah. And I mean, even where I was in Connecticut, they had no cases in that town either, which was very helpful, and it made me feel safe about traveling there. Of course, I didn't like get out of the car between Connecticut and New Hampshire, which with 2 little kids.
Bypass Boston, like,
yeah, I was like, Mass, don't touch me. Just kidding. But it's like, I didn't get out to get gas anywhere between here and there because I was like, who knows what's going on?
Who knows?
Yeah, no. It's good. So recently, I was at a friend's wedding, and I'm just sitting there chit-chatting away with somebody, and all of a sudden this guy comes over to me, and he's like, oh my gosh, are you the girl from the podcast? I was like, it was like my first fangirl moment, and I was like, yes, I have a podcast. So my friend Kelsie, he's like, you guys are incredible. I'm a history nerd. I love this.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome.
It was so cute, and like, he just wanted to talk about history, and I was like, well, I just have to like pause you. I'm not the expert, Kelsie is. I'm just obsessed with what she talks about. But it was just really cool to like see.
Expert. I think that's the problem.
Yes.
That there aren't enough about women's history. So.
Yes, but it was like, I'm not the history teacher. Kelsie is, but it was. He was just so sweet and very kind, and like just gave us a lot of props for what we're up to, which was really cool. And then he shared like how many people he shared the podcast with, which was so cool. And we obviously are like seeing that, which is fun. We've had so many cool people reach out to us and be interested in learning more about the podcast and helping us with the work, which is really cool. So thank you to the people that are listening and like being interested and hanging out with us, it's cool that, it was an idea that, you had, and then we're here doing it, but people are excited about it, which is very cool.
Yeah. It's been really validating through social media, just having lots of people tune in and, remind us how important this work is to get this stuff out to people, whether you're a teacher or not. And so thank you to everybody who's shared what we're doing to history teachers too, because the more history teachers that are listening to this and other podcasts that are out there on women's history, but also going to our website and accessing all the different lesson plans. And I should clarify, like, I'm putting lesson plans up that I'm making, but I also link to literally every lesson plan that's available on the internet on our website.
Yeah,
and
which is, I mean, such a huge resource. And that was one of the things. I had a teacher reach out to me who listens to our podcast and loves our Instagram and Facebook, and she's basically another stalker. But she was like, I love the lesson plans that you guys put up there because it's just easy to access. And if I'm like stumped on an idea, she's like, I just went up there and downloaded what was there and what was available. Obviously made it my own, which makes sense. And that's what we love. Like, I love to, like, when we hear from teachers, like, what about this idea?
Yeah.
Or could you cover this topic? Or how would you do that? Like, I love when people reach out to us. So I think, you know, there's a little plug there too of like, please reach out to us if you have ideas. We've gotten so many really great suggestions, and we're definitely open to more and seeing what we can cover.
Yeah, I'm very excited. We have some exciting people coming to join us on the podcast.
Yes,
in the next couple months.
I know, big teasers, but we have some really incredible people. I'm excited for the upcoming things for people to listen to and get to know more about the authors that we're talking to, which I'll like geek out over. And then like some very cool women are joining us on the podcast. We have some really cool stuff coming up.
And we got more other history teachers joining us.
Yes.
Yeah, it's going to be really neat.
Okay, so what are we getting into this evening?
So the last time you and I sat down to do a podcast, we talked about the standards.
Okay.
And that is one of the great measures for, you know...
These are the state standards.
Yeah, state standards and national standards as well for, like, what are people expecting of teachers in the classroom? And another way that we can look at, like, how women's history is being covered in the classroom is to look at textbooks. And the first thing I want to say is that modern sort of best practice is don't use textbooks.
Well, then why do we have them?
Right. So the reason for that is because the textbooks are notorious for not really teaching kids the things that we're trying to teach them, right? We're trying to teach them to be critical thinkers. We're trying to teach
and not
them,
teach to a book and like run through a book.
The book, when you read a book, especially a book that's like U.S. history, world history, right? These are like this is what happened. It makes it sound like everybody agrees that this is what happened. And some textbook authors do a really good job of getting kids to think because they embed primary sources into their text, like contrasting primary sources. But a lot of textbook authors have that sort of like godlike, omniscient voice that's like, here's what happened, memorize it, you know? And that's not what we're trying to get kids to do.
Yeah.
So I teach AP U.S. history, AP world history, and then general level U.S. history to upperclassmen.
Which I imagine come with pretty hefty textbooks.
So AP, yes, and I don't use a textbook in the general level class.
Okay.
And the reason I don't is because that's not current practice.
Yeah.
And the reason I don't follow current practice in AP is because they need to know so much material that there literally is not enough time in class over the course of the year for me to teach it to them. And so the textbook is how... And I'm trying to prepare them for college, where textbooks are usually it's like a book rather than a textbook. But books are normal, and reading outside of class is normal. And this is a college level class. So I use a textbook as sort of like a college, you know, this is a college level class, so you are going to be reading outside of class. And then I should say, I did my AP certification at St. Johnsbury Academy. And
is that Vermont?
It's in Vermont.
Okay.
It's the closest one to us here that does the certs. And it's really fun. Like it's like all the nerdy teachers getting together and like, oh, you teach AP Calc?
I can just imagine that room getting together, and it's like, hey guys, let's get together.
Yeah.
Sorry.
The lunchroom's pretty hilarious. It like mimics most middle school lunchrooms, you know? So
like the cool kids all sitting together.
it's great. So
how'd you spend your summer? Oh, to this class.
AP seminar. Like, yeah, that was me. So anyway,
how many times do you have to go back and get that certification?
Just once. Like,
that's cool.
So I went when I started teaching AP US history, and then my school offers like a world studies humanities course that's sort of mixed language and history.
Fun.
But they don't have any world history courses, and so I sort of pushed them to create AP World History, and then I went back and got certified to teach it because I had like advocated for it and was not ready.
They're like, now you're in charge of this, Kelsie.
Like, great, shoot.
You're like the kid that's like, can we have this thing? And then they're like, yeah.
Now champion it.
You're like, oh, I didn't mean like me in particular.
Right. So, one of my instructors, I asked her, or one of the other teachers in the room asked, like, how many chapters in these books do you require your students to read?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
Yeah, because, like, sometimes, like, you might cover something really well in class, so do they also need to read it in the textbook?
Yeah.
You know? And the instructor's answer, and, like, I don't know if she's old school, but I took it to heart, which maybe I shouldn't have, I don't know. But she was like, if you do not make them read every page in the book, then you are failing.
Whoa.
And I was like, okay, so I guess I should make them
Did you just immediately get anxiety poops when she said that to you? Like, okay, I'll teach all the books.
Everything you say, I will do. So, yeah, and when she said it with such intensity, I was like, okay, like, I guess I have to do that. So,
oh my gosh.
So I do require them to read a lot. I do occasionally skip chapters, and I know that I broke the rule.
All right, I won't tell.
Okay, thanks. Don't tell anyone except for the
5,000 listeners. Hey guys, this is a secret between all of us. Let's keep it, please.
Please. I don't require every page. Oh my god. Of course, my students will be like, she makes us read every single page, but they're lying to you.
Don't interview Kelsey's students. They're a bunch of liars, thieves, hoodlums.
Of course, they're probably listening.
Oh,
great.
what's up, guys?
What's up? We love you.
Yeah, wear your mask.
So textbooks are not great, and they don't facilitate like inquiry learning, and that's sort of the idea. And so by teaching with primary sources, not only are you teaching inquiry learning because kids are reading sources that are saying different things, and they have to think about what source is more believable, what source is not believable. Like, that's great, and like I want them to think about that all day long, because think about like, you know, like right now we're in the middle of a campaign season, and you've got the New York Times saying one thing, you've got Fox News saying another thing.
Oh gosh,
like, this is a thing that every adult has to do. Kids need to be prepared to do it. And so let's practice with something that's like not emotional. You know, like the Civil War happened maybe that's still emotional.
Feels relatively current.
Feels like it happened yesterday. But, you know, like history,
something that feels removed.
It feels removed from our present enough that we can try to be objective and look at the sources, and then hopefully that translates into our current world.
Okay.
So that's the big thing, is just don't use textbooks.
Okay, so what are we using instead? All of these things. So
the thing that gets hard is that then it puts the onus on the teacher to know the sources to go to bring them into class.
Well, I mean, let's think about teachers, though, in general. None of them really got into teaching so they could teach by a book. They got in there because they want to be Dead Poet Society. They want to be the inspiring person. They want to, build kids up, and they want to, really get them nourishing for education and thought and... it's rare that you meet someone that's like, here's your book.
Here's your book. Right. So the problem, though, is that in a lot of schools, they do require you to have a textbook. And in a lot of schools, like, that textbook matters. And so...
Sure.
And this is how history is going to be presented. And there are textbooks that are good, and there are textbooks that are bad. And when it comes to... So in big picture, when a teacher is evaluating a textbook, what I would encourage... first thing, if you have an opportunity to purchase textbooks, which fortunately I work for a relatively wealthy school district. The kids aren't wealthy, but the school is. So I've had
because you are in kind of like a vacation land where there's a lot of second homeowners, lake money, so they invest in the town, but they don't have kids that go to that school, which is helpful.
Yeah. So we have. So I've purchased textbooks a couple times, and so when you're looking at a textbook and you're trying to decide, do I get this one or do I get this one?
Yeah, that must be kind of a difficult process.
It's a really challenging process, and so what I do is I skim through and I look for the textbooks that have primary sources embedded in them.
Okay.
And I use, in my AP World class, I use a book called Ways of the World, which is actually right in front of Brooke right now.
It's holding up my mic stand. Yeah. It's lovely. It's very thick.
Its typical purpose. But that book is a really, really great book. At the end of every chapter, they actually have like 5 different contrasting primary sources. And so, the typical like end of the chapter questions. For that book, all the end of the chapter questions are primary source based, using the materials that are right there, and then you use the content that you just read about to evaluate those primary sources. When it comes to women, that book is actually really awesome because almost every chapter they spend at least a page and a half just talking about women and gender in that time.
Well, way to go, Robert W. Stayer and Eric W. Strayer. Yeah. I didn't learn how to read yet. So Eric W. Nelson, nice work. Nice job, gentlemen.
And I was really impressed. They cited some of the women whose books I've read, which was really exciting. So they did a really good job. So looking through the book and making sure they include primary sources. We also have to remember that we have diverse students in the room, diverse learners in the room. So how many images are in there? How many maps?
Give me all the pictures.
Data sets, right? Because there are lots of ways to learn historical material, and it doesn't have to always be text-based. So is it packed full of that stuff? You can also evaluate it, like literally how many pictures of women are in this book? How many pictures of black
Can you
people?
Google that? Or are you counting?
So I literally have done studies. I did one this summer with a couple of my students.
Oh, that's cool.
And we literally just count how many women are mentioned, how many women are pictured, how many women are quoted or cited in a
How many books did you tell me all about the study?
So let's hold on my study because I want to tell you about studies that preceded the one I did.
Oh, okay.
So, and doing a literature review essentially on textbooks was really hard because all this type of information is buried. Like, it was really, I've been researching women's history for literally years, and I've been looking for things like this, and it took me a long time to find one study that cited all the other studies, and I eventually, found them.
Okay.
So Trecker is pretty much the person. Her name's Janice Law Trecker. She's the person that everybody cites first. And in 1971, she did a study where she basically looked at are women's topics being taught in these textbooks. She evaluated.
So she was the first pilot into this.
I don't know if she's first. Like I said, it was really hard to find this type of stuff. But right in the heart of the feminist movement, it kind of makes sense in 1971 that she might be one of the first
to kick off this.
And or at least study it academically, right? And so she basically concluded that topics in the women's sphere were absent. Like, if it's not politics, military, right? Like all the things we've talked about,
right? Then it's not.
Before,
it's not there.
It's not in the textbooks. She said that even in cases where women and men worked jointly on a mission, women were excluded and men who were working on that mission were included.
I'm sure this surprises none of our listeners. Right. Eyes are rolling, but
it reminded me of our conversation with Danielle last week where the women women led the civil rights movement, and then the NIA basically took over and excluded them from the bus boycott leadership.
Right.
So that's basically what she found, but on tons of subjects. So it cracks me up because it's not that women aren't doing stuff. It's literally in the editing process.
They got cut out.
They get cut. So, anyway. In 1986, Mary Kay Thompson Tetrault basically looks at a bunch of different textbooks, and she uses this feminist assessment of a textbook that's 4 tiers of assessment. And it's a really interesting theory where basically at first it's just like, do they have that like side bulb about women that's like, oh yeah, and like, Rosa Parks did da-da-da-da-da. Like, do they mention their names at all, even if it's a side measure? Then the next part is like, in the textbook, do they say like, here's what men were doing, and here's what women were doing? And the Ways of the World book that I was just telling you about, they kind of do that, where it's sort of like, here's the sort of general themes. Oh yeah, and what women were doing was all of these things, right?
Okay.
So it's sort of this like she calls it like bifocal, like you're looking at the worlds as if they're not integrated. Yeah. Right? As if like my husband's life does not impact me at all. Right?
It's an interesting topic.
Right. I know. So, one of the interesting, and she also points out several, like, weird facts, because they were, like, in one of the blurbs in a textbook, they were talking about how during the Industrial Revolution, there's all these improvements to technology that, improved everybody's daily life and daily work, and she said that these textbooks did not value women's work at all. So, like, domestic labor wasn't even, like, calculated in that. And so despite all the technological revolutions that are happening outside the domestic sphere, there's basically none of that is happening in the domestic sphere. And so while men's work is getting easier, women's work has not changed. And so on average, a woman was working 51 hours a week, and like in domestic labor, right? Because everything was harder, right? You hand washed laundry. You like hand scrubbed your floors.
I mean, you had to go out to your yard, kill a chicken, bring it in, pluck the feathers, and then put it in the oven. That's a 5-hour process.
Right. Or like go to the butcher because there's no like preservatives, right?
Yeah, no, and you're doing that daily.
Right.
You're not doing big grocery shopping like we are now.
Right. So her point was they don't give it any attention, and because they don't give it any attention, they make these claims that everything's getting better, but for women it wasn't, right? It wasn't changing. And like, so anyway, she has this sort of like bifocal approach, and then she talks about sort of like these higher levels where not only are you integrating, right? So it's happening, like we're talking about how women and men's lives, fun fact, impact each other.
What?
I mean, shocking information. But that also, so like tell these stories at the same time. And then...
You just blew my mind. They knew each other?
Right. And then the other thing she was talking about as sort of like the final tier is you have to explain women's thinking in the process. And so like Seneca Falls, for example, a lot of textbooks are like, so women's suffrage, like they all just showed up at Seneca Falls one day. Like why?
There was no planning or like thought thinking, before, like, this is bothering us, we should get together.
And like, what is bothering you, and how did you have the cognitive breakthrough where you went, you know what, that's wrong.
Yeah.
Right? I don't deserve to be treated like that. So anyway, like talk about women's thinking, and women's thinking is entirely excluded. And get into individuals. Like Elizabeth Cady Stanton was one of the leaders of that movement. Like, what was it for her that was so hard?
Yeah. Why did her story and her journey to that day matter?
Right. How did she get there? Like, why did she care enough to, like, do that?
Okay. Who else do we have over there?
Okay. So, in 1997, the American Historical Association, which I'm a member of.
Oh, are you?
I am. And I don't think that most history teachers are. I think they are part of like NHCSS or NCSS, because that's social studies broadly. But
in New Hampshire.
There's
probably
NCSS nationally.
Right, okay.
But I really wanted to be current with scholarship on history, and so they send out like a great journal every quarter or whatever, so I get those, and that's nice.
Membership for journals.
Yeah.
I like it.
I'm a nerd. So they came out with a guide, a statement with no measure to like actually evaluate whether textbooks are doing that. But basically they said that if you are going to write a textbook, it needs to do these things. It needs to reinforce high quality history by empowering students to do history, right? Inquiry, right? What we've been talking about.
Okay.
So every activity that's built in there, it needs to get kids thinking. It needs to teach critical thinking and how to understand bias. Right? Which includes the textbook itself.
Yep.
Right? Because the textbook is not immune to bias.
Right.
Provide continuous chronological content showing continuity and change over time, which is like such an AP phrase also, by the way. But basically, like, these are some themes, and here's how it was in this time, and here's how it is today. You know, and like all the way through. And then reflect current scholarship, and it has to be peer reviewed. A lot of textbooks have typos in it, and it's like, if this was really like reviewed well, like these would not still be in here, right?
It's surprising when it comes from a publisher. Like editors at publishing houses are diehard, and there's spelling errors.
It's killing me.
Oh man.
And it needs to include the factual experiences of diverse people.
So broad.
So broad. So
and what's factual?
Who's fact?
Yeah, exactly. Whose narrative are we going with there? That's really hard to kind of create those tiers, and there's a lot of them there. There's a lot of them there. And then also when you're thinking about it, it's like, how do you start with one, make sure they all have them, then start with the second? Like, how do you even go about making that research?
Right. And, I'm finding it hard when you say diverse people. Like,
who are you speaking of?
Who are we talking to? Like
underrepresented minority groups?
On Instagram reach out to us, and she's like, I hope you're doing Jewish women's history. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's a great theme. We need to include that, too. And so, like, when we say diverse peoples, we mean white people, we mean black people, we mean indigenous people, we mean Asian Americans.
Yeah, all backgrounds, all creeds, all races.
All of it. And all sexualities.
Yes.
And so that's a lot to, like, it could be overwhelming. And as a history teacher, I'm constantly you have to cut. And so how do you decide who makes it and who doesn't? And textbooks are in the same boat, right? Unfortunately for them, they have many pages, right? So you can do a lot more. We get snow-dayed out and whatever.
Well, and like if you're trying to approach things to get kids to be critical thinkers, you're not going identical to the book. You're trying to challenge them with the content that's available with other materials too, to balance that out. And so you're going beyond A, B, C, D. You're going out A2, A3, A4, and then that's half a year.
Yeah. I found a really cool lesson plan that's targeted for elementary schools.
Oh.
And which those are harder to find in these types of
I would imagine, yeah.
And so I found this really cool one where you basically have your elementary school students evaluate their textbook that they're using for social studies, whatever it is.
Clever.
And it's awesome. So, but yeah, getting kids to really be thinking about this. So they wrote this guide. The American Historical Association writes this guide in 1996. In 2006, this girl named Kay Chick basically was like, yeah, so you wrote that, but like, what do you mean by that? And when you say diverse people, women are people, and they are part of the political minority. So do you mean like textbooks need to cover women? And also, do you mean that, like, do you mean 50-50?
Yeah.
Like, what are we talking about here? And I mean, earlier studies, like the Trekker study, found that textbooks cover women that, like, most women, like, they're not part of women's movements. They're not part of women's history and sphere. They were talking about women like first ladies. Right?
Yeah.
Who, like, these are women who, by no choice of their own, were put into this position.
Right, exactly.
And maybe they were, sort of that political wife who was super excited about a career in politics, but but textbooks overemphasize first ladies.
It's like the only woman that existed at the time, the way they make it out. It's like, there was Eleanor Roosevelt leading the charge. She was the only one making things for the home run. It's like, there was a lot of wives, mothers, sisters, women that were part of that effort in that time period. So she's not the only alive.
Right. And it also, it's just like classic top-down hierarchical history. Like, here's the top woman, she's the first lady, so let's talk about her. So Kay Chick is basically, she's not convinced. And so she starts doing quantitative analysis. So the earlier women are doing more qualitative, like how are they talking about women? And so textbooks have improved in how they're talking about women over time, but in terms of quantity, not so much.
Right.
So her study was much smaller. She looked at really just 3 textbooks, 1 elementary school, 1 middle school, 1 high school. And she basically was looking at how many women are being covered and at each grade level.
Okay.
She found that in elementary school, fewer topics in general are covered, and that makes sense, right?
Right.
These kids need, like,
foundational learning.
And then by high school, they are exposed to a ton more, like, people, and so you would think that at least proportionally or like as a percentage, it would remain the same from elementary school to high school. But what she found is that elementary schools actually do a really good job of introducing characters. And I remember learning about like Helen Keller and like Harriet Tubman in elementary school. And then I got to high school and it was like all white men that I was learning about.
Yeah, basically like modern economics, I feel like was what was covered all the time. It's like, we get it.
Okay, cool. So Rockefeller did stuff. Next.
Yeah, exactly.
So the high school textbooks that she studied, textbook single that she studied, basically was like as a percentage, there were fewer women in it than in elementary school.
Okay.
So that's a problem. So this summer, I sort of picked up on her theme, and I was like, okay, let's look at this quantity. Like, they might be doing a better job talking about women and introducing women's concepts, but let's look at this in terms of quantity. And so I had students look at 3 different AP U.S. history textbooks that I have. And these were textbooks that were given to me by the publishers when I was at the AP seminars. Okay. Because they encourage you. Yeah, they're like, here, take these books for free so that you order them for your class.
Kind of sweet.
I have like tons of textbooks in my closet, and so I was like, all right, let's look at them.
You're so sexy, Kels. Tell me what else is in your closet.
Okay.
Do you have just unlimited caps and gowns in there too? What are those things? Tassels? Not the sexy kind, the ones that go on hats.
Yeah. So these are books that I was given after 2015. And in the study that we did, let's just look at some numbers. One textbook, for example.
Wait, how many kids did you have toiling away in the summer hours?
Just 2, and they were amazing girls. They worked so hard.
Good for them.
They're amazing.
What nice young women that want to hang out with their teacher in the summer and read textbooks. Now I'm a little concerned.
So, total men. So in one of the books, this was in the American Promise. There were 1,073 men mentioned by name in the book.
Okay.
There were 255 women mentioned by name.
A huge difference.
Huge difference. In another book, it was 909 men and 189 women.
What? It's like they didn't even exist.
So the quantity there just like tells you that this is.
I'm sorry. Every textbook should start with women gave birth to you. That's why you're here.
Yeah, you're welcome. Next.
And that subsides all of the rest. Like, this is where we start, birth, and then you move on.
Right. Yeah. Literally.
Did none of these men?
For you to
Yeah. Did none of these men have mothers? They were just immaculate conception.
I look. Of course, I want to know like images and primary sources and all these other things that are helpful in teaching kids.
Okay. All right.
So, in one of the books, 300 images of men, 86 images of women. In another book, it was 111 images of men. That book in general just had less pictures. They had 33 pictures of women. Primary sources that were included, 31 primary sources authored by men, 13 authored by women, like half. 70 in another book authored by men, and 19 authored by women.
This is infuriating.
It's infuriating because it's like by the numbers we know that the scales are skewed towards measurements that women will never, like, if you don't talk about the women's sphere, if you don't value women's work, if you don't discuss improvements in domestic labor, if you don't talk about birth, menstruation, all these things that people want to avoid talking about but dominated women's lives, then
you're missing
these
it.
Numbers are going, like, I don't even need to read the content to know that they're not talking about the women's sphere, because if they were, it would be equal.
Or way closer.
Way closer, right.
That's really frustrating. And it's also like, it makes you think that women didn't exist. And that's not the case. Women were very much there. They were very much doing things at that time that were significant to moving the needle forward in all of those subjects, politics, like everything that you've covered. Mm-hmm. They were there.
They were there.
Men didn't do this alone.
And I think we talked, when we were talking about the standards, sort of the default is white women.
Sure.
So, like, in the absence of this stuff, white women sort of pop forward, and we found the same patterns in the textbooks where white women were mentioned by name with significantly higher frequency than black women, and not even, like, remotely accurate to the percentage difference. Like, right, like, more like, this is an American history textbook.
Okay.
More American women are white, so there should be more white women mentioned, but it should be at least proportional, right?
Yeah.
And that just, like, wasn't the case. So this is a really objective measure of a textbook. And the textbooks just aren't talking about women. So when we're looking at textbooks from a women's history perspective, the measurement is really just like, are you talking about them? And, like, later we can get into, like, are you biasing, right? Like, are you talking about just first ladies and wives and mothers, or are you talking about all these other people and their unique experiences? If you wanted to evaluate a textbook in terms of, like, racism and other things, like, yeah, like, you can look and see if they use inappropriate language when they're talking about...
Which you would hope anything that was recently published wouldn't, but you'd be surprised, I'm sure.
It's bad.
Yeah.
So, we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back to talk about women who served during the Civil War as spies.
Oh, all right. Let's do this.
For lesson plan ideas and how to teach women's history, visit our website, www.remedialherstory.com. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Remedial Herstory. If you think what we're doing is needed, please consider joining our Patreon community. Patreon allows you to sponsor a podcast with a small donation. Patrons get access to bonus materials, extended episodes, insider information, and gear. Patrons who give at the $10 tier will receive a Remedial Herstory sticker. We want to sincerely thank some of our patrons for their contributions. Kent and Jamie Heckle from Ohio have been some of our biggest fans from the beginning. Thank you so much for your contribution. And a huge thank you to Bridget Erlandson from Connecticut. As an educator, your endorsement and passion for equitable education means a great deal. Thank you for your support and endorsement. You can find a link to our Patreon page on our website, www.remedialherstory.com, or you can go to patreon.com and search for Remedial Herstory.
All right. right, welcome back. So we're going to talk about women who served as spies during the Civil War.
I'm so excited for this topic. Very fun.
Yeah. So it might surprise a lot. So a lot of the women who served during the Civil War served as women and were spies in their role.
Okay.
Notably, there was an unnamed black woman who, she was a laundress in the Capitol in Richmond, and she worked, like near Robert E. Lee, and so she would leak information on the clothesline from inside Robert E. Lee, who was the general, the Confederate general during the Civil War. She would leak information out using different codes
on the clothesline?
On the clothesline. So she, the red shirt meant whatever, and the black shirt meant da-da-da-da. And she would, move things up and down the line if...
Depending on...
where people were moving and, that type of thing.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
Yeah. So, a lot of women just did things like that in their jobs.
Yeah. Still a huge role in that time.
Yeah. Super, super important. A lot of women during the Civil War served as nurses. It was sort of like cutting edge. Clara Barton, who founded the American Red Cross, she was really cool because she would cross battlefields as bullets are flying around her and just drag men off and saw their legs and she was awesome.
That sounds pretty badass.
She's pretty badass. Like Dorothea Dix, who went on to to advocate for the insane later.
Yeah.
She served as a Civil War nurse under under Clara Barton. So there's a lot of women who did really amazing things like that. And then there are countless numbers of women who, during the war, put on pants and cut their hair and pretended to be men and served.
What?
And and it's this sort of unknown bit of history. So
all I'm imagining in my mind right now is Mulan.
Yeah.
Which is probably very inaccurate, but my dad can't serve and someone has to go from our family, so we must dress up like a man.
Yeah. Well, so for a lot of these women, it speaks to all the problems that women were facing in the 1800s that we were talking about when we were talking about suffragists. Like they don't have rights to property. And so how do you get those rights? There was one woman, she was born, her name was Sarah Edmondson. She cut her name to Edmonds because she ran away from home and hated her dad. But it is known, and she got a pension because she served during the Civil War under the name Frank Thompson. But she started dressing as a man way before the Civil War.
Okay.
Because she was like, I
need pockets.
Job. I need pockets in my pants, and that would be lovely.
Number one reason why women dressed as men. Pockets.
No, she was like, I need a job.
Okay.
And all the good jobs go to men, so if I just look like a man, then I can get a good job.
I mean, I like her theory.
Yeah.
Sounds like it worked out for her.
So it's it was more of an economic thing.
Okay.
Now, I don't know, and I think we should probably put in here, people in, prior to our time did not have the language for trans, queer, gay,
There was no labels then.
There weren't.
It was just all one bucket.
Sarah Edmonds went on to write a book about her experience as a soldier in the Civil War. And so we got a pretty intimate picture of her thoughts and feelings about the war. And it's pretty clear that she considered herself a she, and that she saw herself as a woman in soldier's man's clothing. But that's not true for all the women that fought in the war. We also know that Sarah Edmonds encountered other women that were on the battlefield. She found and treated, as a nurse, another woman who was serving in the war, and she only knew that it was a woman after inspecting her body, right? But there are lots of other women who knows how they would have preferred to be documented, and maybe being a man was how they would have preferred. And so historians need to be really gentle with those topics as they dive into them. One thing that's interesting about Frank Thompson's story is that after about a year of dressing as a man, and he was like a traveling Bible salesman,
clever.
He went back home to his childhood home, and he knocked on the door. And I guess this is like common. People would like give strangers food, but his mother took him in and fed him dinner. Fed him. I don't know what he preferred, but dinner, and dressed as a man. And Mom, at the end of the dinner, was like said to his younger sister, like, this gentleman looks so much like your sister who left a year ago.
Stop it.
Yeah. And he didn't say anything. He didn't tell his mother. He didn't correct her.
So interesting. Yeah, without hearing directly from the source what they would prefer as their pronouns, you have a hard time.
Right. But before we get into women who cross-dressed during the Civil War, cross-dressing was very common throughout world history. Right. And
we've seen it show up time and time again in some of the other narratives that you were talking about when we talked about the medical history.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Hypatia comes to mind.
Yes, yeah.
She gave, she was a famous lecturer. She dressed in male, robes, to show that, as like a status thing. And so was it male or was it just that profession? Right. In around the same time as the Civil War, Dr. James Barry, he's a very famous example. He was one of the first people to perform a C-section. He was serving as a doctor for the British Empire, performs a C-section. When he dies, he basically says, please bury me in the clothes that I die in.
Yeah, don't do an autopsy on me.
Don't do an autopsy. Don't look at me naked.
Essentially. And
turns out that Dr. James Barry was biologically female. There was evidence that Dr. James Barry gave birth, that he had stretch marks on his stomach from where he had given birth at some point in his life. Some people think it was there's evidence that he was raped by his uncle as a kid, and so he gave birth to this
incestual
child. And who knows, if that was motivation to get the heck out of there,
Yeah.
I don't know, or whatever. And I think the fact that he requested to be buried in his male clothes. And,
that's how he wanted to be known as and presented.
Right, and he didn't want, his work and his legacy to be challenged.
But the trans community does really celebrate him.
Yeah.
And hold him up as an icon.
Yeah, totally. There are lots of examples like this in world history, and a lot of times you don't find out about it until after these people die. Dr. James Barry's, the nurse basically was like, I'm gonna do an autopsy. I want to look. I want to know.
Interesting.
He had been curious or something. So, he had requested to be buried in his clothes, but he wasn't. They changed his clothes when he died. I had a really cool opportunity in college to study at the Library of London, and I got to wear...
Of course you did.
Yeah. I got to wear, white gloves and go in and look through historic newspapers from, the 1500s, and, just touching these old newspapers was so
I can just see you doing this and, nerding out so hard.
Yeah, it was so cool. So I was looking for newspapers that were talking about women who cross-dressed.
Oh, okay.
In Shakespearean era, because Shakespeare talks
oh my gosh, cross-dressing all the time,
right? So women are cross-dressing all the time in Shakespeare. So how common is this? And basically, what I concluded is it's common enough because in newspapers, people are ranting about how bad this is for society. Women need to stay in their space, stay on their side, and it's corrupting the morals of society. And it was a way that women could like sneak off with their lovers at night, you know, because they wouldn't be questioned for being out at night. You know?
Oh yeah, the whole chaperone theory. Like you don't need one if you're a man.
Right. So, but then of course there's the economic thing, which we saw with Frank Thompson.
Right.
So there's lots of reasons why people did it, and I just want people to understand that this is something that has happened throughout world history. It's not like randomly like, oh, so Civil War, I guess we start now.
Yeah, no, you can pick it from any point.
Yeah. So we can't not mention Harriet Tubman.
No, I mean, she basically, that should be where you start.
Yeah, you start with Harriet Tubman.
You start with Harriet Tubman and you keep going until you get to Rosa Parks.
Right. If you haven't seen the new movie Harriet,
oh my gosh.
need to. It is so good. I watched it.
Let's do an entire podcast about watching that movie.
Oh my god. So I watched it on an airplane.
How could you watch that with other people around? I never.
At the end, I was bawling.
Yeah, no. I can't watch things on planes where I know I'm just going to ugly cry through the whole thing.
Yeah.
But Harriet?
Yeah.
I mean, you were asking for it.
I was asking for it. So anyway.
You wanted strangers to see you ugly cry. Get some sympathy drinks from other passengers. You're like, I'll take 4 tequilas over here for Harriet.
So that film is really great. What's nice about it is that it's not rated too highly. So
yeah, so you can watch it.
You can watch it in a classroom, which is really great.
Do you think that was intentional? Because that's kind of awesome.
I hope it was, because because how do you teach about slavery and the Civil War in a PG-13 way?
You can't,
know? So, but they did. They figured out how to like decrease blood, violence, whatever, but still like make it very clear that this is going on.
That's awesome.
Harriet Tubman escapes from slavery, and she lives near Philadelphia. And one of the big themes, and what's hard in history classes, you really want kids to understand cause and effect.
Right.
And so the big thing is that prior to the Civil War, they passed some fugitive slave laws that basically mandated that everybody in the North is a slave catcher. And if you see a slave and you don't turn them in, you are culpable. But if you live in one of those border states, like where Harriet Tubman was at the time, she was in Philadelphia, you were probably more vulnerable to slave catchers because they're, you're right
on the border. Yeah, it's like being in Maryland. It's like you're right there in the Mason-Dixon.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, this is where it gets scary.
Right. And so when these fugitive slave laws are passed, she starts going back and getting people out. And
I know for people listening who don't know Harriet Tubman, which you would imagine that that's like a state standard that's been in the textbooks.
Yeah, she's number 1.
Yeah. So
she is interesting because she gets the nickname Moses. And
yes.
There's sort of the like biblical reference there to Moses, who leads the Jews out of bondage, into the desert and saves them. So that biblical reference to her being Moses is interesting. But then there's also this sort of like gendered reference, because you basically are, first of all, the slave catchers were looking for a man who was getting all
these slaves out. They weren't looking for a woman.
They didn't believe that a woman could do this. And in war, that's a reoccurring theme. During the Civil War, so the Civil War breaks out, after this. During the Civil War, she is the first, and I think the only woman to command the army.
Yes.
And lead a mission to get slaves out of bondage. And she's responsible for freeing, numbers, figures vary, but around 750 people on this one mission.
Wow.
She said that there were women carrying their babies with 3 in tow, and just
everyone's going
to her. But she led the U.S. military down because she knew more about this area than anybody else.
Yeah, she's been there. She knows the back routes of everywhere.
Okay, so the Confederacy also had spies working for them. The most famous is probably Rose Greenhow. Have you ever heard of her?
No.
Okay. She was known as Wild Rose. That was sort of her nickname.
That's a fun name.
She was sort of a wealthy woman who lived in Washington, D.C., and used her position to sneak information to the Confederates. And she basically, not only did she leak information, but she sort of ran a spy ring of people who, like, worked underneath her.
Like other women?
Other women and men. So she sort of, like, she was the ringleader of this, like, gang of spies. She got some critical information in 1861, and this was about the Union's attack on Manassas, Virginia, which was where Bull Run, the Battle of Bull Run, happened. She sent a 16-year-old courier, her name was Betty Duval, 20 miles through Union territory with this message, like a coded message tucked in her hair, and it got all the way to the Confederates, and Jefferson Davis later said that and basically credited their success to her leaking that information and getting it to them. Belle Boyd was also a Confederate spy, and she lived in Virginia and had really strong Southern loyalties. She became a notorious spy for the Confederacy, leaking tons of information. And then eventually the Union basically found her. And so she spent a lot of time, in prison, actually. And somehow, I don't know if she's just, like, stunningly beautiful or, like I don't really know what, like, qualities this woman possesses, but somehow she gets them to the guards watching her to get information out. Like, she still continues to leak information out from within prison.
I mean,
so
good for her.
She's incredible.
There are two really great books that I've read about women who served as spies during the Civil War.
Okay.
One of them was called Amazing Women of the Civil War. It was written by Webb Garrison, and this is a bit older, but he goes into detail on all sorts of women, and then like including Clara Barton and whatnot. But he talks about these women who took up arms for the war, and many of them were probably buried, where they died,
right,
without
markers or anything,
and without any acknowledgement that they were female, right? Because people probably didn't know. And so that's a pretty cool book. And then there's another one by Karen Abbott called Liar, Temptress, Soldier, Spy.
I mean, all of my favorite words
in a title.
In a title, like, yes.
Yeah, and that one's really cool too, and super rich in primary source. That one's really rich in primary source material. So women during the Civil War, take up arms to get pensions. Right, you can get a military pension for serving in a war. There were a lot of benefits, like there were, like, the Homestead Act encouraged, gave anybody who served during the Union, or for the Union, could, like,
get land.
And all
yeah.
That. Like, this is a great opportunity for women to get land. There's probably also, like, following lovers into war, right? And so women are going off to war with their significant other. There are women serving as nurses. There are women that, for all the same patriotic reasons that men go off to war, like, women feel those things too. And so going off for the cause.
I can't imagine if you and I lived in that time that we wouldn't have just been like, all right, we're in. How do we be a spy?
Oh my gosh, yes. Okay, so I wrote a lesson plan about the book Nurse and Spy in the Union Army, which was a book that Sarah Edmonds, a.k.a. Frank Thompson, wrote about her time in the Civil War. I think it would be really cool to contrast her life experience in the war with Harriet Tubman. So that's an option as well. And basically that you can kind of like ask kids to reflect on what it would have been like to be a woman with this sort of double burden that all the soldiers are fearing for their lives, are scared for, whatever it is. But they are also experiencing the fear of, what if I get caught?
Yeah.
Right? What does that look like? Is this a dishonorable discharge, or is this a whipping? Right? Like what is this?
Like a rape, or they take your home or your children or anything else that's happening to you in your life.
Right.
Oh man. I bet that's awesome. Thanks, Kelsie. I'm Brooke Sullivan.
I'm Kelsie Eckert.
See you next time.
Thanks so much for listening to Remedial Herstory, the other 50%. Please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to your podcasts to bring more voices to the conversation. We really appreciate that effort. Until next time.